Apologize for the late start time. It's completely my responsibility. And I apologize to my fellow committee members and to the audience. And let's try to make up for lost time by starting with item 1.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Rafael Breda with the CLA's office. Item 1 is the Emergency Water Conservation Plan as proposed by DWP. We'd like for you to consider this item with items 2 and 3, which are related.
Great.
You continue this item from your July 15th meeting, requesting that the Department City Attorney amend it to include language relative to the Mayor and Council's authority with respect to issuing phases. They've done that. We have staff from DWP.
All right. Have a report.
Good morning. Madam Chairman, members of the committee, my name is David Nahai. I'm privileged to serve as the General Manager of the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, and trying to make up for lost time. I think the process changes that were required by the committee have been implemented and are now part of the ordinance that you have before you. We're more than happy to present the matter again or to respond to any questions which the committee may have.
Anybody else?
Do you have anything else to add?
Nothing else to add.
David, you have something?
If there's any questions for the city attorney, I'll be happy to address them.
Okay, why don't you all identify yourselves?
Robert Roth, CAO.
My name is Tom Erb. I'm the Director of Water Resources at LADWP.
And David Hotchkiss, Assistant City Attorney.
So you all came up to keep David company, huh? That was nice. When we first heard this back in July, we requested the department to come back with language that would maintain the mayor and council's authority to declare and terminate water conservation phases. Does the latest revised ordinance contain this language?
I'll address that. David Hotchkiss, Assistant City Attorney. If you draw your attention to page 3 of the draft ordinance, section 121.07, you'll see that beginning in section B, the mechanism is identical to that's in the existing ordinance.
It's on page 3121.
I'm sorry. This is page...
Dash 0.03, which letter?
No, it's page 3 of the draft ordinance, which is attached to the city attorney's cover letter. In any event, the language now mirrors exactly the language that's in the existing ordinance, which basically requires that the department advise the mayor of the existence of a drought condition, which calls for some type of action. Then the mayor does an independent evaluation of the conditions brought to the attention of the mayor by the department, and with the concurrence of the council, a phase can be declared under the ordinance, which means that certain restrictions would take place in the utilization of water.
Just one
It
interruption.
says page 3?
Page 4.
that's what
All
it
right,
is. Thank
page
you.
4. Thank you.
Well,
Okay.
Missed it by that.
Okay, and the section number again is?
121.07.
Got it.
Okay. And I'm sorry, on the copy that was provided to me last night, it's page 3, subdivision B.
Yeah, it actually starts at the bottom of page 3 and then continues at the top of page 4.
We have a different
We have
version.
different versions, 4 and 5, but that's okay.
Oh, I apologize.
Okay. But it's still section 121.07.
121.07, correct.
Okay, great.
And so, also inconsistent with the existing language of the ordinance today, is the phase termination, which is again recommended by the department and with the concurrence of the mayor and the council. So there's full oversight by both the mayor and the council in this process.
Okay, maybe you can refer us to another section. We were also asking you to grant the council the option to hear violation appeals if the council decided it was necessary. Where is this language included in the latest draft?
And that is located in the appeal process, which is section 121.09, and on my copy that begins on page 7. It may be a page later on your copy. And if you go to subsection D as in David, which on my copy is page 10, it may be 11 on yours, you'll see that any customer who disputes the results of the initial hearing determination may appeal to the city council, and or in the alternative, the city council may elect on its own motion to consider any matter that's been determined by the Department of Water and Power through its hearing process.
Okay, great. I also understand the ordinance includes language that would permit the Department of Recreation and Parks to irrigate longer than 15 minutes if necessary. Did you do due diligence or whatever to do outreach to Rec and Parks with respect to the previous draft, and if so, what was the outcome, and where is the language in this ordinance?
The outreach to the Recreation and Parks Department did occur. There was significant discussion with them, as I understand it. The way it was addressed is that the Recreation and Parks, with their large turf areas, are served under the provisions for Schedule F, which is large turf customers. This would also include, by the way, large contiguous properties, public properties such as schools with playing fields and things of that nature. And to address the problem, it was decided to exempt Schedule F customers, which are a relatively small group of customers, from the application of the ordinance in its totality. So they are certainly admonished by the existence of this law to be conservative in their use of water, but they're exempt from the phases.
Okay, now, two more quick questions. Tell me about your enforcement plans in terms of the prohibited water uses, and especially on prohibition of irrigation of lawns between the hours of 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. And how do drought buster crews work to be able to cover the entire city to make sure that that is enforced?
I'm going to defer to the department on that issue.
Yeah, let me respond to that. We are expanding the number of drought busters that we have roaming the city, and their primary role is to be providing awareness of the prohibited uses, and we try to maximize the media exposure that we have and to let the public know how not to waste water. But they are prepared to issue violations, which is a written violation if they do observe an infraction of the prohibited uses.
Mr. Cardenas has a question.
You said that you're expanding the number?
Yes.
Come on, from what number to what number are you talking about? How many? Is it 2 to 4? Is it 20 people to 40 people? Is it 100 to 400 people?
The full-time drought busters, it's my understanding they'll be expanded to 16 full-time drought busters. But in addition, we are putting the word out that any customer, city employees, DWP employees who see a violation can call in to our 800 number, and that information will be transmitted to the drought busters to follow up.
And what source for budgeting are you getting or utilizing for these 16 people or so?
The source of funding would come from the DWP's water conservation budget.
Okay, and how much is that budget for these busters?
I would have to think that it's about $2 million, I think, in the coming fiscal year.
What are the qualifications, or what is the ideal person that you'd like to have in that position? Are they more the technical type person? Are they more the kind of person who is good at public outreach?
The staff comes from our customer services division, and so these are customer service representatives who have experience in dealing with customers. They understand our billing methods and how to communicate with customers, and so right now we have customer service representatives performing those jobs.
So the idea is to have that pool of 16 people come from that source?
Yes.
Okay.
And the other thing that I would add, council members, is that the department has been here before. We had the Drought Busters program back in 1992, I think, when the last long drought hit the city, and so this is really a resurrection of a program that was in effect at some time. So the department has had some experience with this. The numbers are getting expanded. There's actually a whole cadre of people that supports the Drought Buster program. And also the last time I checked, even at this stage, even before the adoption of the Water Conservation Ordinance, I think the number of calls that have come into the department regarding wasteful uses of water have numbered something like 1,600. And so this is even before we have this water conservation in place. So we're hopeful that as the Water Conservation Ordinance is adopted, as it takes hold, as it's publicized, that this won't be simply a matter of drought busters driving around the city, trying to monitor behavior, but that they will receive many calls and will be able to do their job a lot more efficiently because the populace will participate in this entire process.
Great. Any other questions, Mr. Cardenas? Ms. Gruhl.
I know one of the issues, and I think my staff may have talked to, I'm not sure who in DWP, but talked a little bit about some of the concerns raised by Rec and Parks and others about the difference, kind of like our recent issue with the heat zones and so forth, as far as taking into consideration, a little bit different from Long Beach, because their climate, and most of that is somewhat consistent, versus here in the city of Los Angeles, where there are different parts. And I think that they were concerned about the moisture content in the air and temperature were not uniform, and that however this enforcement and setting up looked at that, so that the uniform code be a little bit adjusted. And I think the recommendation that we had stated to your staff was that we create a working group of LAFD, LAUSD, Rec and Parks, DWP, and the Conservancy be formed to kind of look at developing a mechanism to encourage conservation, which also taking into consideration some of the safety issues and investment issues where potentially there are areas that need to be irrigated more because of fire danger than there would be in other areas, and because of moisture content and so forth, that we needed to kind of look at that and amend. So I think we were given the impression that you all were okay with that part of it, that you create that task force and to come back and see if there are any changes needed to reflect that.
Absolutely, would be very, very pleased to be a part of that task force and to see it go forward.
Okay, and I think probably we would want you to chair that, to convene it.
Happy to do it.
And to be able to look at those microclimates and how that impacts on the, again, certain parts where we may need, and Rec and Parks were concerned because they had not, I don't know if there's a Rec and Parks staff member here. Oh, see the hand raised. I don't know if you want to add anything or if that addresses the concerns that Rec and Parks had relative to the adoption of this and taking into consideration some special needs potentially.
Right, I think you got it.
Okay. So if Ms. Perry, if we can ask that to be a request or amendment to this and ask the department to come back with it.
Why don't we have it, how quickly do you think you can get this done? 60 days enough?
Excuse me one second. Are you talking about amending the proposed ordinance or having a report back from the department?
I think probably adopting the current ordinance with the understanding that you would need to come back and there potentially may be either in its implementation or in amending the ordinance to reflect some of the special needs for those areas that are unique.
Well, let me just speak to that just briefly, if I may. And under Section 121.10, there is a specific provision of exemption for public health and safety where in the opinion of the department, with concurrence of the department, special exemptions can be created. Okay. And I think that we have written it in such a way to allow for exactly the type of situation that you're talking about. In other words, there's enabling language in the ordinance that allows for these types of deviations.
So maybe it doesn't. The ordinance may not need to be amended, but I think in the implementation, we need to understand what those exemptions would be and how we would deal with them. And so I think the departments expressed at a meeting last week some concern that they hadn't had that opportunity to say, here's some safety issues that we need to address in its implementation.
I think that's right. The ordinance as amended does have the necessary flexibility in it. Okay. And we will commit to form the task force and to take a look at the microclimates and come back with any changes that may be necessary in the future.
Okay.
And for the record, Mr. Alarcon is here. We have 3 speaker cards, all from the same individual. for item 1, 2, and 3, which we're hearing together. And his name is Daniel Weissman. Is he here? Would you like to come forward and speak? One of the gentlemen will vacate a seat for you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you said, my name is Daniel Weissman. I have a lot of hats, as many of you know, but I'm going to speak as an individual who is very much involved in the neighborhood councils. I'm going to speak when I get some attention.
Please proceed.
Thank you.
The clock is running.
The clock
Go
is
ahead,
not
start
your
the clock.
eyes, and the clock is not your attention. I
Yes, please
request
start
your
the clock,
attention, please.
Thank you. You can begin.
I'm here to speak on this, on all three of these, and the same thing or very similar things would have been said for each of these three items. As you know, we have a memorandum of understanding between the Department of Water and Power and the neighborhood councils. That memorandum of understanding is in place in order to make good communications between the department and the neighborhood councils. The Oversight Committee's job, and I'm its secretary, I'll speak as its secretary now, is to watch that the memorandum of understanding is abided by. In this case, it has not for these issues. This is the first time that I have seen, and as most of you know, I'm pretty diligent of watching issues. First time I've seen the council file numbers for these items. It hasn't been referred to the neighborhood councils. We haven't been given adequate time to consider and respond. If we had, we very well could have supported and augmented or helped to modify this into something that's good. In my last 40 seconds, I'm going to talk as an individual who washes his own car with water that does not have soap in it. And I think many of us like to do that. I don't expect to see a drought buster parked across the street from my house when I put the car in my driveway and start washing my car. I am concerned that the first level of appeal is to the city council, which is notoriously an inefficient way to appeal a legal matter. And in the matter of the parks, as someone with 4,000 square feet of garden, which I'm very proud of and very pleased with, I would suggest that if adequate irrigation systems were in place, 5 to 10 minutes is more than enough time to irrigate anything, even the largest turf.
Thank you very much. Okay, there's no further speaker cards on this item. Motion to approve.
Just a point of information, the first level of appeal is not city council.
It's to the Department of Water and Power.
Right.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garcetti.
Extant hearing program.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification. Without objection, I'll make a motion to approve.
As amended.
As amended.
It's amended.
Okay, great.
Madam
And-
Chair?
yes.
Is that a note and file on 2 and 3 as
Yes.
well? Okay.
And then we go on to 4. I just want to make a couple of comments on 4 before we get into the conversation. We first considered this contract May 23rd of 2008 and rejected the DWP board's March 18th, 2008 action to approve it.
That'd be painful.
And the rejection came based upon our committee concerns about high-level manager DWP had represented the company known as, I guess it's Osmos, as recently as 2007. Upon the rejection of the contract, the DWP board was requested to determine if there was any conflict of interest associated with the approval of this contract. Then again, in June 19, 2008, the board reconsidered the agreement and approved it. The approval of the contract followed a closed session meeting to determine the conflict of interest, and I think that that was a meeting where, at least I know my staff member wasn't permitted to attend. The DWP board's June 24th, 2008 transmittal resubmitting this contract to the council makes no reference to a conflict of interest finding or determination. So subsequently, it came back to committee. We continued the matter from July the 29th, requested that the DWP provide a transmittal that makes clear findings and a determination relative to the potential conflict of interest issue. And what I am attempting to do here is to get the department to clearly set forth a process by which it vets its contracts, has a third disinterested party review them, and make a determination that there is no conflict of interest, much the same as other departments are required to do. I know the redevelopment agency has to do it. A number of departments have to do it. And I think it not only inoculates the department and the commissioners, but as it moves forward through the legislative process, we can vote on a contract with the assurance that there is no conflict of interest. Now, and I appreciate Mr. Nahai's letter dated July the 30th, 2008, which discussed the conflict of interest determination with respect to the Osmos contract. Now, I don't know whether having the general manager write a letter is sufficient enough to preserve that level of objectivity with respect to whether a contract has a conflict of interest or not. And I'm attempting to, and I'll be very forthright about this, to get you, the manager, the commissioners, on the record as to whether or not they're going to invoke or create a process of review for vetting and reviewing contracts or not. I don't think it's sufficient, and it's certainly, no slight to you at all, the general manager, to have someone who's running the department be the sole determiner of whether a contract has a conflict of interest or not, particularly when it has to pass on to my colleagues and we actually have to vote on it. I'd rather have it voted on based on a solid review by someone who doesn't have a horse in the race or a third disinterested party, as we discussed yesterday. And as I bring my colleagues into this, knowing that I'm bringing them in with a contract that's been vetted and reviewed. And again, not only does that go to your protection and the protection of the commissioners, it goes to the veracity of the process, which is what I'm seeking to invoke. So what I need to know is there a process or not, and what if any process have you used to go through this? And I had to tell you that, and I appreciate it, David, that you wrote the letter, but I think in terms of going on a going forward basis, that you're doing a letter is not, it's not an objective enough process. And you need your board to vote on it, or you can give me some input as to what your attorney advised you, your DWP attorney, but give me some response to that.
Certainly, Council Member. Thank you very much. Let me first introduce the gentlemen who are here with me on this matter. To my right, I have Mr. Richard Brown of the City Attorney's Office, and to my left, Mr. Ali Morabi, who deals with contracting processes. And I stay assiduously away from the selection of contractors. I leave that up to the process of the department, as does the Chief Operating Officer. I want to thank you for your comments. We have the greatest respect for this process, and is exactly what should be done in all cases. I must apologize if my letter left the impression that I had somehow made a determination as to the existence of a conflict of interest in this case. The purpose of the letter, and it may have been that it was inartfully crafted, the purpose of the letter was actually to let the committee know the process that was followed in order to determine that there was no conflict of interest in this case. And I've asked Mr. Brown to be here in order to talk about the process that was followed. But before we do that, just for 1 second, I don't think there's really any question in this case that in terms of substance, there was no conflict of interest. This is a situation in which the individual involved followed all of the city requirements, made all of the necessary disclosures, both on the Form 700, to me personally, as well as to the Ethics Commission. There was an ethical wall that was constructed between him and these vendors and he provided consulting.
And let me just interrupt you for a second. In the case of other departments, often what they will have is a form that goes in the file that says, City Attorney John Doe has reviewed the XYZ contract and has determined effective this date that there is no conflict of interest. That should be the outcome. Something like that. And I don't think that is something that's in the file as of this point. So as you go through your discussion, if you can help us understand a process, and hopefully maybe you can update your process so that in all outcomes on all contracts, you'll have something in the file that indicates, yeah, this has been vetted, this has been voted on by a commission, reviewed by our attorneys, and it has been determined that there is no potential conflict of interest.
I understand, and if the committee will indulge me, I'd like to go back and take a very close look at that suggestion and come back to the committee on it. The reason for it is solely this. As you know, we let something like $1 billion worth of contracts every year. There are thousands of contracts that go through. I think it's one thing to ask the people who are involved in the contractor selection process, the people who serve on the committees, to have them make a declaration of no conflict. I think that's fine. I'm concerned lest we go farther afield.
I'm not talking about that.
Okay.
I mean, this is a chance for you to probably upgrade your administrative procedures in a way that is probably more in conformance with the way other city departments do it anyway. It's certainly not an insult or a slight. It's just a process, and I think it'd be a good one. And I think it goes to everyone's betterment to be able to do that, so that when we take a vote on a contract, any contract, we vote on it with confidence that it's been thoroughly vetted. And in effect, by the time it gets over here, that means that your attorneys and your commissioners have certified that there is no conflict of interest, so that when we take that vote, we go, okay, they've looked at it. We've had 2-3 levels of review prior to arriving to the committee, and that, I think that's good for everybody.
Right. Well, with that, may I ask Mr. Brown to report to you the processes that we did follow and the kind of levels of vetting that we did go through for these contracts?
All right, my name is Richard Brown. I'm General Counsel to Water and Power. Basically, David had asked me, and the board had asked me, just prior to the board meeting, to vet this. We went into closed session under 54.956.9, which is anticipated litigation, assuming that if we had, for some reason, because of the questions that were asked and the answers that were received, had to walk away from the contracts, there was going to be litigation. Basically, it was just a factual thing. What I advised was that we have to ask the appropriate factual questions. Number one, was there anything that of a pecuniary interest that Mr. Raj would be receiving here? Was he involved in the picking or selecting of the vendor? Was he on the distribution list of any correspondence that went on? Was there an ethical wall that was created where it segregated him from this type of purchase contracts? All the questions that were received in closed session were in the negative. In other words, none, no interest, no distribution, whatever. Had there been an affirmative answer at that point in time, we would have to seek legal opinion based upon that answer. If there was a 1090 problem, pecuniary interest, or there was a political reforms question, or it would have to go to the ethics committee. The board was satisfied with the responses that were received. I then went into open session and announced that no improprieties were found and that each contract would be voted upon based upon their own merits.
And is that statement that you've made in open session reflected in the actual record on the file and in writing?
It was recorded.
Okay. I think maybe what we need to do is to help the department and get a process established. And again, it's a punch list. It's what other departments use. Maybe we can get some suggestions from ethics and whatever, and then adapt them to your needs. But so we can stop going through this. We've been going through this now since I think May, and asking the same question over and over again. And I got to tell you, I still feel like I appreciate the fact that you shared this with me, with the committee, and that you did go through a deliberative process in closed session. But again, I think the outward manifestation, what formally goes into the record, is what really matters. And I'll be really blunt with you. I'm attempting to get you as the department and your commissioners locked in on contracts. You either say that you support them, you vetted them, or not, and I wanted it in writing, so that if something comes up down the road, I want you to be part of this responsibility too. I don't want you to be able to say, well, we talked about it in closed session. I wasn't in closed session. My staff person wasn't in closed session. I don't know, for the record, I don't know what you actually did in closed session other than what you've just reported to me, and I have to take it on faith. But you know, in terms of administering a contract, it doesn't necessarily need to be on faith. It's pretty technical. You know, you're either you ask a set of standard questions to get uniform answers and uniform information so that you make a comparative analysis so that you, again, the process of vetting, transparency, and making sure that you've asked all the substantive questions that need to be asked. I'll stop for a second. I think Mr. Alarcon has a question.
Yeah, does the Chief Operating Officer have any responsibilities with the contract selection process whatsoever, under normal conditions?
Why don't you, Mr. Murby, why don't you talk about the contractor selection process that we follow?
I'm asking a very specific question. Does the COO have any responsibility in the contract selection process normally?
The COO does not participate in the contractor selection process.
Whatsoever, in any case?
We're talking about these contracts, and he wasn't a part of the selection panel.
No, I'm not
didn't
talking
serve on
about
a
these
committee.
contracts. I said normally. Under any conditions, does the COO have the responsibility to oversee the selection process?
I think the answer to that in my administration is no.
What does
The
the COO doesn't have any responsibility to manage the selection process? Does the city attorney have any view of that?
No, I'm not involved in that segment.
All right, I think we'll allow Mr. Al Stevens to respond to that question in particular.
Good morning. Al Stevens, Director of Supply Chain Management. The answer to your question is the process does include a sign-off before contracts go to the commission from Mr. Raj.
Okay, did he sign off on this contract?
He did not.
Okay. Was there a formal document expressing his exclusion from what his normal duties would have been?
No, there was not, to my knowledge.
Mr. City Attorney, wouldn't that be declarative of the potential?
That would have been, that's a great question, and the answer is not a good one. When I first learned of the situation.
Let me revise the question.
Sure.
If in fact Mr. Raj did not sign off on this contract, wouldn't it be curious as to why he would not sign off on this contract, and therefore, if in fact he did not sign off because of the potential for a conflict, should he not have been declarative about what that potential conflict might have been?
That's correct, but let me just understand, let me make this understanding. Number one, we would never, in the legal department, have seen at that point in time, because we've already approved the contract for legality and form. In addition, when we first found out that there could have been a potential conflict, was just prior to the board meeting, and that's why we went into closed session, and that's why we vetted it, and that was one of the questions that was asked.
Okay, my question again, under normal conditions, would Mr. Raj have been in the position to sign this contract off?
Well, I think we need to clarify what a sign-off of the contract means.
Well, I don't know, he described it.
Well, no, that's because he's using the language in the.
No, he said they actually signed.
No.
Sign off of the board letter.
No,
Right.
no. Let me explain this. It's important that you understand this distinction because I don't want the impression to be left that the chief operating officer or the chief executive officer selects the contractor. That does not happen. What happens is that there's a process. There's a process by which a contractor is selected. It could be through an RFP. It could be through a sole source. That goes up the department. There's a panel that decides on these things. At some point, a board letter is prepared, and it's a document that transmits the contract to the Board of Commissioners for approval.
Absolutely.
Or it is that board letter that is signed off on. It's signed off on.
Yeah,
by
I'm very familiar.
Okay.
If you're not aware, Mr. Nahai, I worked for the city 15 years before I was elected. I know the process. So I'm asking, would the CEO normally be responsible for signing off on that letter?
On the board letters?
Yes.
Yes.
So in this case, he didn't sign off on that letter. Why not?
He didn't sign off on that letter in this case because the letter didn't go to him for signing off because there was an ethical wall between him and anything to do with these contracts,
Okay.
including the ministerial act of transmitting it to the board.
Where is the document that speaks to this concern?
If your question is, was there a document which said that there's an ethical wall and that he's to be separated from these contracts?
Right.
Yeah, and I think the answer to that I think is no. There may have been a memorandum that went out to that effect, but a formal document of that kind, I don't recollect it.
Well, a formal document as opposed to a wink and a nod.
A wink and a nod? What?
I think we all know what I mean by that. The point is that if in fact there was any perception of a conflict, there should have been a formal statement to such.
Well, as I say, I understand that all of the city...
The board should have been made aware, for example, that there was a perception of a conflict, or there could be. Was the board made aware of that before they decided on this matter?
Yes, we went into closed session. It was vetted. The
No,
questions
that
were
was
posed.
after. That was subsequent to the original approval of this contract. I'm talking about before, when the original contract went to the board.
I think there was no conflict of interest. There was no involvement.
Then why did he not sign off on this letter?
Well, no, I mean, you can not sign off on something even though there isn't, I mean, your question appears to be that there has to be a conflict of interest to begin with in order for somebody to be...
No, there needs to be the potential for a conflict of interest, and
An acknowledgement.
The fact...
I'm suggesting that the fact that he did not sign off on this particular letter indicates that he was knowledgeable about the potential for perception of conflict. And that there should have been some kind of declarative statement by the CAO that in fact that was the case. Not being there, I don't think the board was fully informed about the conflict. I don't know whether they were or not, but I don't see any evidence that the board was aware that there may be a perception of a conflict. And indeed there was a perception because it was in the paper.
Well, yes, it was in the paper. I can say that the COO discussed these consultancy relationships with me before he came on board. He discussed them apparently with the Ethics Commission before he came on board. He was advised that he had to follow all of the city requirements, which included full disclosure on Form 700, which he did, which included a severance of all monetary relations with these entities which he followed, and he had nothing to do with selecting these contracts.
You are an attorney, and you are quite well aware of the notion of full disclosure. I think that Mr. Raj should have fully disclosed that the reason he didn't sign the letter was because of a potential perception of conflict. To not do that is indicative of a failure to fully disclose the potential conflict.
Which is why I keep circling back to process on the record, because that not only inoculates you and your board and the department, but as it moves forward through the legislative and deliberative process, it shows on the record in writing, and I'm not talking, I appreciate the discussions and all that, but discussions don't matter because there's no proof. And it's not part of the record. All that we can rely on is what's in the file, what checklists have been signed on, what sign-offs are there, what reports are given to us in writing, and what you say publicly and on the record. And the veracity of that, that's all we have to rely on. Yes.
Again, what we are talking about is the trusting relationship between the DWP and the public that it is served, the ratepayers that it serves. That when you create perceptions like this that are embellished by a news report, whether or not there was in fact a conflict of interest, the perception is there, it undermines the trust. And it undermines the trust that could have effect on bond measures, on rate increases, on everything else, and anything else related to the city of Los Angeles. That's why we're concerned about the process.
And I am concerned about the process. You know, a news report is just a red flag, and I certainly not reliant upon, oh my gosh, a news report, let's, get out all the fire engines. But the issue is uniformity in review process that is in written form, a hierarchy through the department in terms of review, sign-off, vetting, and then once it reaches your commission, what has been told to them on the record, and whether we have the ability to examine that record to make sure that the information that is given to them has been uniformly shared with us in a way that we've been able to vet it based on the same factors, so that there is objectivity, there is that third disinterested review of a contract, and that we have a nice, tight process. I'm not sure we have that here. And plus, we find ourselves in a unique situation. This matter has been scheduled for council on Wednesday, and if we don't take an action, whether it is affirmative or negative, it will be deemed approved. Am I correct about that, Mr. Steele?
The first item, the osmosis agreement, the deadline for that one is August 15th.
Okay.
The next item, item number 5, which has similar Lincoln issues, is this Friday, August
Okay.
8th.
Okay.
We would recommend that both be considered in council jointly, though, because they have similar Lincoln issues again.
Okay. I'm not quite sure what to do about this. You're asking us to make a leap of faith, and I'm not entirely comfortable with that. And I'm here to help you. You may not recognize it as such, but I know David and I have had conversations recently as yesterday, and I appeal to his experience as a lawyer, is that serves you very well in this capacity and understanding process. But we need to have some help coming back from the other direction.
We do. Let me say a couple of things. The contract should not be held up. These are necessary contracts. They've gone through all of the processes. There hasn't been a single allegation of wrongdoing here. This is a man whose integrity is
I'm not, David. I'm way past that. You don't need to be defensive about it.
Well,
I'm trying to help you understand the necessity of having a uniform practice on the contracts that come to the committee, so that again we don't have to keep doing this. That's all.
And I agree with you. And as I said right at the beginning, we'll go back and take a look at this and report back to the committee. I think what we can do is to say that whoever is in the contract selection process can needs to sign off on something. But let me just say this. For instance, to say that somebody working in customer relations that has nothing to do with the contractor selection process, that, we've got 8,500 people over there. So it's a matter also of practicality while trying to make sure.
Maybe you can help us figure out that matter of practicality. I don't feel like I feel like we're treading water at this point, and we're not making any progress. And in some ways, maybe we're talking past each other. So I think what I'll do is put together a motion so that we can start working on this process together, so that we can develop a process where we actually have, I know the redevelopment agency does it all uniformly when they put a letter in the file after review by their council, and they have a number of factors that they look at. And I'll see if we can't gather that information and see how it applies to the DWP on a going forward basis. But on the issue of this contract, maybe what we can do is start with Ms. Gruhl and get a comment from each one of the council members on the record, because I'm really not comfortable with the direction this has gone thus far. And I think you and I have done a lot of outreach to each other on it. But again, I don't have a strong sense other than supply
chain.
Board sign off, commission votes, closed session, a report out in open session, and then, that was after it had been to us and we pushed it back once. And I don't feel a sense that we've made any progress there. So why don't we start with Ms. Gruhl, if you wanted to make a few comments on if you're ready to vote on this before we take a vote. I'd like to get a sense of the direction of the committee and how they're feeling.
Well, I think I think what's been highlighted today is some concerns of process as it went forward. The question is, has that impacted necessarily the decision? Did you kind of remedy those? And I think what I've heard is that there's been from the attorney and others that you have gone back and made sure and kind of crossed your T's and dotted your I's in that instance. But I think what the chairwoman is saying is, how do we ensure in the future that the process is very open and transparent, so that if there are any issues, that everyone is on the same page. So it sounds like you've done all the work in this time, but I think we need to have you come back at some point on the process part, which I know she's interested in.
Madam Chair, I might recommend, the city attorney has stated that they don't believe there was a conflict of interest in this case. I'm not exactly comfortable with the process, but I think maybe the city attorney can provide a report to DWP as how they might improve the process with regard to the CO. And
So what you're saying, then, the city attorney is going to take the sole responsibility for being the determiner that there was no
well, I think
potential conflict of interest.
each of us will make that determination
You're
as
okay
to
with
where
that?
they're going to.
Well, what I'm okay with, what I'm trying to explain to the board is when it first came to our attention, we did what any attorney would do. We'd go to the board and we asked the relevant questions. If one of the questions was answered in an untruthful way, I wouldn't know it. I suspect it was not. I know the individual. I feel comfortable, but the questions were asked. The board met, heard the answers, and made a decision on it. I happen to agree with you. We have to take this ab initio from the beginning, and when somebody comes to the department and they have potential conflicts, that some type of a correspondence, some type of procedure has to be affected, so everyone knows that under no circumstances does this type of a company go in front of that individual because there was a relationship, and will affect
Also,
that.
your board is informed, and we're all informed, and, whoever makes the determination, they're going to take responsibility for it if it falls apart down the road, or if a conflict does arise. And that's the mantle that you're, about to put on your shoulders. Now, you need to know that.
Well, and clearly,
I think the
we
board
will
knew it
do
at the
things.
time,
Well, look, clearly, we will do things differently in the future.
Well, I think we're going to need to
that's
work
absolutely
together.
clear.
Specifically occurred was that the person with responsibility normally to sign off on a document changed the procedure because they were,
Can I clarify that?
yeah, maybe you should clarify
Please,
if
let
there's
me
a change
clarify
to that.
Let me
No, it doesn't change. It's just that the hierarchy is such that David would sign off on those documents. His next in charge, if he's not available, would then sign off. So the fact that he is in that loop, yes, if it's necessary, but in this case it wasn't. David was there, David signed off. But further than that, the Ethics Commission, we do an annual ethics sign-off. So it seems like what you're asking for actually exists in some form. To have that maybe raised up to include submittal in terms of a contract is the only piece that I see as missing. But there was no intended circumvention of that individual at that time,
I'll tell you
because
my impression of this,
Yeah.
just for what
Yeah,
it's
he'll
worth,
lack it. Yeah, you're right.
this isn't a junior administrative assistant. This isn't a management assistant. We're talking
No,
about
he's a
we're talking
COO.
about a COO.
Yes.
And if he doesn't know that red flags will be raised about a potential conflict of interest in this case, where he used to work for the consultant that's being considered, then I don't think he should be a COO. I mean, so I think that management needs to be more sensitized to the ethics to the issues of ethics. He should have raised red flags at that point, as a standard practice.
Mr. Cardenas.
It was mentioned about going into closed session. This matter has been before the board once or twice?
Been before the board twice now.
Twice. Now, did the board go into closed session to clarify whether or not there was conflict of interest the first time it came to the board or the second time it came to the board?
wasn't there the first.
I think,
Take your time. I don't want to hear any guessing.
No, I wasn't.
That's not going to help.
Actually, it was the second time. After we went to the city council and it was returned, the second time we went to the closed session.
Well, the thing is, see, you have to understand is that's the basis of this discussion. Why did you not go into closed session the first time? The potential for conflict existed when this guy got hired. The fact that he had ties and/or worked for this particular company or had other contracts related in the field, and now he's the COO of the largest municipal water and power district in the country,
Mr. Carter.
doing billions of dollars of business every single year. This is not the first time, nor is it going to be the last.
Sir, I can tell you that the first time I heard of this, and it was brought to my attention by several commissioners, that I immediately went into closed session at that point in time. Now, obviously, if it's agendized as an open session item, we can go into
But
closed session.
please clarify. Thank you for letting us know that the first time you heard about this issue, you went into closed session with the board as their attorney. But the fact of the matter is, I would be more comfortable if that would have happened the first time. The whole point of this discussion is what is going on at the Department of Water and Power when the COO potentially has the authority to sign off on this board letter, did not sign off on this board letter, yet at the same time, his name is all over this issue because there is a potential for conflict. Do you understand what I'm saying? That's what the chairwoman and Councilmember Alarcón have been trying to get at this whole half hour. But the thing that bothers me is, Mr. Nahai, you opened up a Pandora's box when you just said a little while ago about the integrity of this individual or what have you. Has this individual ever worked for the Department of Water and Power before coming back as a COO?
No,
What were the conditions of him leaving the Department of Water and Power the first time?
well, that's a whole other
No,
issue.
it is the business of the legislative body of the city of Los Angeles.
I'd be more concerned.
That's why we have checks and balances. That's why the board is not final on contracts like this. Had the board been final on this contract, we wouldn't be having this discussion.
We
be more
we
concerned about
fully
the
we
investment.
fully understand, Council Member, and this is why I've said clearly in the future we need to do something differently. And I've asked for the opportunity to go back and see how we can revise, upgrade, update procedures in order to make sure that the next time something like this happens, we have a clear record of the disclosure
Well,
and of the
we're gonna try to
war.
salvage this before the next time. This can be our first exercise in doing this.
But the last point I'd like to make is this. I think the biggest issue before us here is the silence of this not coming to the attention of the board or the Department of Water and Power, noting the fact that there was potential for conflict before the board had to vote on it in the first place. That's the biggest problem that we have here. Because subsequent to that, and it being turned back to the board once it went to the council, that's what causes issue of us not being able to trust what's going on at the Department of Water and Power. The fact that the matter is that people maybe are too lax and too willing to say, oh, he's a great guy. It's not an issue. That's not formality. That is not documentation. That is not on the record. That's the good old boy system. And the good old boy system does not have a place in this country. The good old boy system does not have a place in the largest municipal water and power district in the country. The good old boy system does not have a place in any of our processes. And the fact that there was silence about the potential of conflict with the COO, we're not talking about the assistant to the assistant to the assistant secretary. We're talking about the COO.
Eric's got to go.
Just real briefly, I have to go,
you can go
before
back.
you respond, Mr. Nahai, I have to chair Rules of Government Committee meeting just before the council meeting, so excuse me for leaving, and I'll get a briefing on Cabrillo Beach and the groin removal later. It's in the documentation. Anyway, the suggestion I would make is that we do something where we can, see, it's right here.
Okay, got it.
Gotcha. Is that we forward it without recommendation, and I think there are two things that the chairwoman asked for. One was something from the city attorney on record, which you've put on the record, and the other suggestion was Ethics Commission, and perhaps in the 24 hours, at least before the first one, and tomorrow, which would be when one of them's scheduled in council, I believe, you get an official kind of not ruling, but at least an opinion or some expression of making sure that with this one, that's taken care of, and that there is no there's no reason to believe that there is any evidence of wrongdoing. That said, we can work on the report back from city attorney, on working on the process moving forward. If that's done the next 24 hours, then we could vote on approving it in council.
And the short version is you need an opinion letter from the attorney stating upon the review of the record, there's been a determination that based on the information presented, there's no potential conflict of interest. So that somebody has to take responsibility for making that determination, and that person has to be a disinterested third party.
Actually, Madam Chair, I would ask the city attorney to review the ethics documents of Mr. Raj to determine whether or not there are any financial interest in the company, in his investment portfolio. Also, I would like to ask the city attorney to ask Mr. Raj whether he has ever introduced anybody in the selection process to the company as an employee of the company or as a manager at the Department of Water and Power. It's not the selection process per se that creates the problems. It is who knows who, and who can introduce you to who that makes this thing work. Everybody knows that, and in this particular case, I find it hard to believe that the COO, having worked for the company in the past, was not aware that they were applying for this contract. And you know, I think it would be interesting to discern whether or not he in fact introduced that company to key people who had a say in the selection process. So, if with that amendment, I would concur with you. I have no problem with sending this forth to council, but I would like for the city attorney to report to us before it goes to council.
I agree, and I actually was going to suggest that we only send it forward without recommendation, or, you know, I mean, can we do that?
Yes, you can. You can.
Well, we've got 4 now.
Would you like to do that as well with the following item?
Yeah.
The converging group as well?
Yeah. If that's acceptable to everyone.
Well, I think the recommendation actually should be
and couple that
the
with
request of the city attorney at DWP.
Yeah. Okay, all right.
With that amendment.
You got a lot of work to do today. You'll be busy. Yeah,
it's just a few questions.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. That takes care of 4 or 5, and I think for the purposes of time, so we can have a quorum, we can continue items 8 and 9 until...
Your next meeting will be in September, the first week of September, or the second week, actually.
Continue items 8 and 9. So that leaves us 6 and
7.
Oh, good.
Item number 6 is Environmental Affairs Department report in response to motion Perry Parks directing EAD to coordinate with relevant city departments to prepare comments on the AB 32 CARB climate scoping plan process. We have staff from EAD, DWP as well.
Good morning, Gretchen Hardison, Director of Climate and Air Programs in the Environmental Affairs Department.
Hold the mic a little closer.
Sorry.
Beth Gines, Assistant General Manager of the Environmental Affairs Department. We appreciate your motion to coordinate the city's comments on the scoping document that's part of the implementation of AB 32. For the past year, the Environmental Affairs Department has convened an interdepartmental climate change working group to discuss climate change and to discuss the draft documents that have come from the state on implementation of that action. We will continue to bring the recommendations from this working group to this committee in the future and to lead the city's climate change planning and mitigation efforts. Gretchen will provide more detailed information on the city's comments on the Air Resources draft scoping document.
And in the interest of time, I will be brief. As you know, the draft scoping plan sets out the roadmap for how the state expects to achieve implementation with AB 32. It does not contain much detail at this point, but summarizes the primary sources expected to contribute to emission reductions, the approximate contribution of those sources, and the types of strategies that ARB expects to implement, including a mix of regulations, voluntary measures, market mechanisms, et cetera. The plan was actually released in pieces. We got the first part, the overall general draft plan, at the end of June. The appendices were released just a couple of weeks ago in late July, and the economic analysis has not yet been released, so we are looking forward to seeing that. We do ask your permission to submit technical comments on the appendices that are consistent with the approved comments on the scoping plan.
Question.
Yes.
Is there anything in the draft scoping plan that your department may determined or has determined that might be harmful or detrimental to the city?
No, not from our initial reading. We have some questions and clarifications that we're requesting. We wanted to point out the importance of partnerships with local governments because we do have land use authority, transportation authority, and a number of mechanisms that we as a local government can use to help reduce emissions in the community. The Department of Water and Power did an independent review and submitted comments as well, and they may have another opinion.
Thank you. David Nahai, LADWP. I have with me Leilani Johnson-Cowell, who is our resident AB 32 expert. The scoping plan itself actually goes a long way to meeting the concerns that we've previously expressed regarding the implementation of AB 32. But we do remain concerned about some of the cap and trade proposals that are being floated around Sacramento. We're especially concerned about proposals which would compel the city to purchase allowances. And depending on what the per carbon unit price would be, and whether it would be 100% of the emissions that would have to be purchased or not, those numbers can quickly become astronomical.
Please, Mr. Nahai, I think it's important for the public to understand what kind of figures they could potentially grow to, which means that our ratepayers, that's their money. I mean, the source of that money is our ratepayers.
Right.
And the management of the department is dependent on those funds and the management of those funds. What is the potential growth of those figures that you just mentioned? Astronomical, I think was your word.
Certainly. And before responding to that, we would be very happy to come back before the committee and to provide a full workshop-type presentation of AB 32 and all of the various implementation mechanisms that certainly affect DWP and which affect the city in a wider way as well. But in terms of the numbers, if we're put in the position of purchasing allowances equivalent to all of our emissions, that would be 14 million metric tons at $50 a ton. Wow. It would be $700 million. I mean that is at the higher end of the scale, and that would be an absurdity. And we've said that anything like that would be intolerable.
You mean that's not absorbable in your budget as you budget today?
Well, it's not absorbable because in the exercise of environmental responsibility and in the exercise of compliance with AB 32 and the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, we've committed dollars to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. To now have to divert those funds would either make the program suffer, which is unacceptable, or it would be a double hit to the budget, which would certainly affect our ratepayers.
I think double hit is an accurate way of putting it. Secondarily, the way AB 32 is interpreted today, if we were to let go of $300 million or $400 million, or forget, even if it were $150 million, it's not $700 million for some reason. Does that money come back to the city of Los Angeles, to the ratepayer community of Los Angeles, or does it go somewhere else? Therefore, creating a void of those dollars not being able to be used for us to continue to try to reinvest and improve our environmental effects.
Ostensibly, it's not clear, but I'm very concerned about those proposals because you were in Sacramento. Since when has money that has gone to Sacramento ever flowed back? And we're very concerned the money once gone, how from that point it would be distributed. The position that we've taken is that when you have a utility such as ours, which has already committed itself to the reduction of its emissions, which has got identifiable programs to do that, there shouldn't be a diversion of one penny from our budget into some cap and trade bowl or cap and trade scheme, which at best is unproven and untested at this time. So we're continuing to engage on that. As I say, the CARB scoping plan actually now says we're going to accomplish 80% by direct reductions, which is what we're engaged in, and 20% by a market mechanism. So the California Air Resources Board has come a long way to meeting the concerns that we've expressed in connection with this. We just have to make sure that 20% doesn't end up harming the programs which we're righteously following. And we also have to make sure that now we're hearing these resurgent voices about 100% auctions and the purchase of allowances. They're starting to resurface now. And I think we have to go back and do the necessary pushback to make sure that we protect both the programs that we're following and, of course, the pocketbooks of our ratepayers.
Are you saying that the DWP is committed to lowering emissions to the 1990 level?
Yeah, I mean, the climate action plan of the city actually talks about 35% below 1990 levels by the year 2030. But our commitment to 20% by 2010, renewables, for instance, what is that? That is, in fact, a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions.
Well, I just want to be consistent with the legislation. The legislation is asking for us to get back to levels of 1990 by
2020.
2020. Is that consistent with our goals?
Absolutely.
Our stated objectives?
Yeah, we have, remember, let me just
So
be very clear about this.
Your problem is not the goal as much as the method.
Exactly. We have absolutely, we're ardent supporters of AB 32. The city has been, the department has been. As a matter of fact, we believe that AB 32...
Is it the guidelines that are troublesome?
You see, what AB 32 did was it set up a framework. And it left implementation strategies to be decided upon later. It's the implementation strategy, which is what everybody is involved in right now.
CARB's interpretation of the legislation in the form of guidelines that is troublesome to the fund.
Exactly. Well, it's not CARB. CARB has come a long way to meeting, our concerns. It's essentially the Public Utilities Commission, which doesn't even regulate publicly owned utilities, and yet has issued an interim decision that talks about auctions being the way to go, even though there is an E3 economic model that shows that would be even more expensive than direct controls. So this is a debate, we'll call it.
Any other comments, questions?
Okay. But again, we would very much like to do a full briefing on this for the committee and whatever council members, because it's essential that we all become engaged in this.
Well, my last point is, I agree with that, and the sooner we can do that, the better, because I think that the California public needs to know, not just the city of Los Angeles, this is something that, if done improperly, can really damage our ability to be progressive as a state and as a city. And then, in addition to that, I think it's important for us to remind the public that sometimes legislation, either intent or badly interpreted, can actually have a detrimental effect. And I think it's important for us, because we have a stake in this and we have the resources to be able to honestly and hopefully in simple English explain the potential detrimental effect that this implementation could have. I think it's important for us to do that as soon as possible. Sure.
All right, no further comments or questions, so motion to approve without objection. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And again, just for the record, items 8 and 9 are continued to our next meeting. I will take public comment today. So our next and final item for public comment will be item number 7.
Item number 7 is a motion, Han Rosendahl, directing the Harbor Department to report on the condition of Cabrillo Beach. We have staff from the harbor as well as sanitation if you request any questions.
Wait, we missed the suit. Where's the suit today?
Total opposite now, right?
It's non-traditional,
He's got
more formal, yes.
I always listen.
Very good.
Chairwoman Perry, committee members, I'm Ralph Appy. I'm the Director of Environmental Management Division at the Port of Los Angeles, and I'm here today to speak on the Han Rosendahl motion in regards to Cabrillo Beach, and the real issue is why do we keep getting Fs at this beach? And it's a really important beach. It's Mother's Beach, and I'd like to also introduce, we're working very closely, by the way, on this issue with the Bureau of Sanitation, the Stormwater Division, and I'd like to...
Good morning, Shram Karagani, Bureau of Sanitation.
I did provide you with just a brief handout, and I think what we'd like to do is come back in about 30 days with a really detailed report on this, but I would just like briefly to kind of give you an idea of what we're doing. We have been very active on this. We've spent millions of dollars on this protected beach to try to get rid of the bacterial problem at the beach, and it's a mother's beach, so children come down, and we continually get exceedances at this beach, not only in the stormwater time when the rains are coming, but at the dry periods as well. And it's a very complex issue. We've now put into, if you look on the first page of things that completed, we've already put into effect a whole series, we're doing this in a sequence, whole series of actions. We've seen some improvements, but the dry weather exceedance for the TMDL is very unforgiving. It's zero exceedances during dry weather, summer dry weather.
Before you come back to committee and I guess at our next session, would you also make the effort to brief Ms. Hahn to see if she has anything she needs to add?
Yes, we'd be happy to do that, and that's a good call for us. And so I'm not sure what detail you want me to go into today. I know you're pressed.
I think we can, what should we do, Mr. CLA, or Ms. Madam Clerk, continue the item to the next session?
Yes, your next meeting, we're looking at September 9th, so we could hear it
How
on
many
that.
items do we have on the agenda for that so far?
At this stage, we're probably looking at just a handful, so about 3 or 4.
Okay, that's fine.
Is that, I'm trying to think, September 9th? Yeah, that works.
And that'll
That's
give
good.
you time, if we can keep the agenda at a minimum, to give them time to go into detail.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All right, again, items 8 and 9 are continued until September, and then we have time now for general public comment for those items that are not on the agenda. We do have one card from Daniel Weissman. If you would come forward, please. And Madam Clerk, if you would run the clock for 2 minutes.
All right, thank you. And I've asked the people from the Environmental Department to remain too. I'd like to present to you the problem of the Santa Susana Field Lab in the west side of the San Fernando Valley. I'm a member of a committee formed by the West Hills Neighborhood Council, which was concerned with that 2-3 years ago, wrote a rather large document on it in 2006. We still have problems in the area. The contaminations that came from the Santa Susana Field Lab activities include perchlorate, a variety of volatile organics, a variety of heavy metals, and even nuclear materials. When presented to the Friday morning City Council, Mr. Garcetti was kind enough to direct me to a council file on this issue. It doesn't entirely address the current problems, but I'm going to try to get our council members, Mr. Smith and Mr. Zine, to bring forward additional council files on this. The original council file that I was directed to by Mr. Garcetti indicates that this committee, that the Environmental Affairs Department and several other departments, including the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment, participate in and become members of community agencies and committees that are addressing the issue. Our committee from West Hills is definitely one of those. Through our neighborhood council, we of course are attached to city government. I again invite each and every one of you to become aware and to participate in what we're doing, because the issue really is the safety of our community, and we do believe there is still an imminent danger that needs to be addressed and mitigated. Thank you for hearing me.
Oh, thank you very much. There's no additional cards on general public comment. That marks the end of our meeting. Thank you very much, everyone.